The woman was already dead when I noticed the light change. I was 40 feet up in a bucket lift, hands deep inside a signal cabinet at the intersection of Bardstown Road and Eastern Parkway in Louisville, Kentucky, when the 480-volt service panel behind me hummed differently, not louder, differently. A tonal shift, like a guitar string tightened a quarter turn. 12 years working signal maintenance for the city. 12 years of listening to electrical systems the way a mechanic listens to engines. And I'd never heard a cabinet do that. I pulled my hands out of the wiring harness and looked down. The woman was on the sidewalk directly below the bucket. She was wearing scrubs, pale blue, the kind they wear at the Baptist Health Urgent Care 2 blocks east, and she was lying face down with one arm extended in front of her like she'd been reaching for something when she fell. A man in a UPS uniform was kneeling beside her, one hand on her shoulder, the other pressing a phone to his ear. He was saying something I couldn't hear over the hum. Then every signal head on the intersection fired green. All 4 directions simultaneously. I felt it before I understood it. The cabinet behind me physically pulsed. A vibration I could feel through the steel platform of the bucket. And every red and amber module on all 4 mast arms went dark. And every green module blazed. Not cycled, not phased, blazed. 4-way green, which is what we in the industry call an impossible condition. The conflict monitor should have caught it in 0.3 of a second and thrown the whole intersection into flash. That's its only job. Detect the impossible. Shut it down. The conflict monitor did nothing. I heard the collision before I saw it. A Honda Civic coming east on Eastern Parkway and a landscaping truck coming south on Bardstown Road entered the intersection at the same moment. Both on green, both with right-of-way, both obeying the signal that told them to go. The Honda hit the truck's rear quarter panel at maybe 35 miles an hour and spun sideways across 2 lanes, coming to rest against a fire hydrant that sheared off and threw a column of water 6 stories into the air. The water hit me. I was close enough that the spray reached the bucket, and I stood there 40 feet up, soaked, watching the UPS man abandon the woman on the sidewalk to run toward the wreck. And I noticed 2 things at once. The first, every signal head on the intersection was no longer 4-way green. In the time it took for the collision to happen, maybe 4 seconds, the signals had reorganized. East-west was now red. North-south was green. Not the normal north-south phase that gives Bardstown Road its through movement. A new configuration I'd never seen, one that made northbound Bardstown the priority and everything else subordinate. The second, the woman in scrubs was standing up, not getting up, not climbing to her feet the way a person does after a fall, with hands and knees and the awkward negotiation of gravity. Standing up, rising from prone to vertical in a single continuous motion, like a marionette being lifted by its strings. Her head came up last. It tilted back and then leveled. And she turned not toward the wreck, not toward the UPS man, not toward any stimulus I could identify. North. She turned north, the direction the green lights pointed, and she began to walk. Her gait was wrong. Not limping, not injured. Metronomic. Each step identical in length, identical in cadence, like a human-shaped metronome calibrated to some rhythm I couldn't hear. She walked north on Bardstown Road, through the intersection, under the green lights. And she did not look up at me, and she did not look at the wreck, and she did not look at anything. I hit the controls to lower the bucket. The hydraulics whined. It would take 90 seconds to bring me down. In those 90 seconds, I watched 3 more people on the surrounding sidewalks stop what they were doing. A jogger, a woman pushing a stroller, a man at a bus stop reading a newspaper, They stopped, and they turned north, and they began to walk with that same locked step cadence. And the stroller rolled into the street behind the woman who'd released it. And I could hear the baby crying, and nobody turned around. My name is Dale Welch. I was 41 years old. I maintained traffic signals for the Louisville Metro Department of Public Works. And I'm going to tell you what the lights did during the first 11 days. And I'm going to tell you the truth, even where the truth makes me look like a coward. Which it will, because it should. The bucket reached the ground. I stepped off the platform. The baby was still crying. I went to the stroller first. The baby was maybe 8 months old. Red-faced, strapped into a carrier that had wedged against the curb when the stroller rolled off the sidewalk. A girl. I think she was wearing a yellow onesie with no particular signifiers. But there was a name embroidered on the chest. Alma. I unstrapped her and picked her up, and she screamed louder, which I took as a good sign because it meant she was reactive. She was present. She was not whatever those people on the sidewalk had become. I looked north. The woman who'd been pushing the stroller was 100 yards up Bardstown Road, walking at that same metronomic pace, not looking back. She was moving in a stream now, maybe a dozen people, all walking north, all synchronized. I held the baby against my chest and called 911 on my work phone. Busy signal. I called my supervisor, Dennis Corey, at the maintenance yard on Lexington Road. It rang 8 times and he picked up. Dale, where are you? Not a question, a demand. His voice was compressed, the way it got when something was wrong on a job site and he was managing liability. Bardstown and Eastern. Dennis, the cabinet just fired 4-way green. Every signal head, simultaneously. The conflict monitor didn't trip. I've got a collision in the intersection, and there are people walking. Get off the street. I have a baby. Someone left a baby. Dale, get off the street and get back to the yard. Now, don't stop at any intersections. What's happening? We've lost the entire grid. Every signal in the metro area just went autonomous. We can't override. We can't access. We can't even ping the controllers. And it's not just us. Frankfurt is down. Lexington is down. KYTC district office says the entire state signal network just... He paused. I heard something in the background, a sound I couldn't identify. Get to the yard, Dale. Bring the baby. He hung up. I looked at Alma. She'd stopped screaming and was staring at me with the profound, uncomplicating suspicion that infants reserve for unfamiliar faces. I put her back in the stroller because I needed both hands to drive. My work vehicle was a white Ford F350 with a utility bed, a light bar, and Louisville Metro Public Works stenciled on the doors. I loaded the stroller in the bed and strapped the car seat, which I found on the ground near where the woman had been, walking into the passenger seat, and put Alma in it. She started crying again. I told her I understood. The drive from Bardstown and Eastern Parkway to the maintenance yard on Lexington Road is normally 12 minutes. I made it in 7 because every signal I encountered was green in the direction I was already traveling. Not north, not south, not any consistent cardinal direction. Green in the direction I was moving, as if the system was tracking me, as if it was reading my trajectory and clearing the path. Every cross street, red. Every signal on my route, green. I tested it once I turned east on Breckenridge Street on impulse, a deviation from my route. And the signal at the next intersection was red. I turned back north, and it was green again. I want to be clear about what I'm claiming. I'm claiming the traffic signal network of Louisville, Kentucky was responsive, not pre-programmed, not running a fixed evacuation plan. Responsive. It was watching what I was doing, and it was reacting in real time. And it was doing the same thing for everyone else on the road, because I could see them vehicles flowing through intersections. Without stopping, every signal green for whoever was approaching, the entire grid running like a symphony conductor had replaced the timing plans with something alive. Except for the people on foot, the walking ones, the ones with a metronomic gait. They were all going north. Every single one, north, regardless of where I saw them, flowing up the streets like water finding its way downhill. They didn't stop at intersections. They didn't look for traffic. They walked into the lanes, and the vehicles swerved around them. And the lights stayed green, and nobody collided, because the system was managing all of it. All of it. The living and the walking dead, and the 2-ton machines moving between them. I pulled into the maintenance yard, and Dennis Khoury was standing in the parking lot with a cigarette in each hand. He'd quit smoking 6 years ago. He saw the baby, and his face did something I'd never seen: a rapid cycle through confusion, grief, and a hardness that settled in like concrete. "Whose baby?" he said. "I don't know." Her mother walked away. Walked away like the others, yes. He looked north. Even here, in the yard, you could see them. Figures moving along Lexington Road in the middle distance, all heading the same direction. The signals on Lexington were green northbound, red every other way. The whole system's gone, Dale. Not crashed, gone somewhere. The controllers are active, the cabinets have power, the signal heads are responsive. But we can't talk to them. It's like something else is on the line. "Something is on the line," I said. And I told him about the cabinet hum, and the 4-way green, and the way the signals had tracked my vehicle. Dennis didn't argue. Dennis was a man who'd spent 30 years in traffic engineering, and he knew what I knew: that these systems were designed to be deterministic, that every output was a product of known inputs, and that what I was describing was not deterministic. It was adaptive. It was intelligent. It was also, as far as I could tell, keeping people alive. "The signals are routing traffic," I said. "They're preventing collisions. Whatever this is, it's running a better optimization than anything we ever programmed." "And the walkers?" Dennis said. "What's it doing with them?" I looked north again. The stream of figures was thicker now. Hundreds of them, maybe, flowing up Lexington Road in that terrible, even cadence. "It's sending them somewhere," I said. "Where?" I didn't answer. Alma did. She started crying again, and Dennis looked at her, and his face did the concrete thing again. And he said, "Bring her inside. Nina's here. She'll know what to do." Nina Vasquez was the yard's office manager. 53, grandmother of 4. The kind of person who kept a drawer full of emergency supplies that included both a first aid kit and a bag of Werther's Originals. She took Alma out of my arms without a word and disappeared into the break room. Dennis and I went to the control terminal in the dispatch office. The screen was alive with data intersection status reports, signal phase indicators, communication logs. Everything was active. Everything was running. Nothing was responding to our commands. Dennis typed override codes for 40 minutes. Every one was acknowledged by the system and then ignored. The terminal accepted his credentials, confirmed his authority level, displayed the confirmation message. Override accepted, and then changed nothing. The signals continued doing what they were doing. "It's not locked out," Dennis said, leaning back from the screen. "It's hearing us. It just doesn't care." There were 6 other technicians in the yard. Ramirez, who worked the West End. Becca Lee, who handled the Dixie Highway corridor. Tom and Marcus, the senior guys who mostly supervised new installations. Karen Opp, who maintained the pedestrian systems, and Jerome Willits, who'd been with the department longer than anyone and who'd installed some of the original controller cabinets back when they ran on electromechanical timers. Jerome was the one who found it. He'd gone out to the equipment boneyard behind the yard, the fenced lot where we kept decommissioned cabinets, old signal heads, retired controllers. He came back with a look I'd never seen on his face. And Jerome was a man whose face didn't change for weather, politics, or the annual threat of budget cuts. "There's a transmitter on the cell tower," he said. The maintenance yard sat next to a cell tower that served the Lexington Road corridor. We'd always known it was there. It was part of the landscape, like the power lines and the stormwater drains. "There's always been an antenna on that tower, Jerome. Not this one." He held up his phone with a photo. Mounted to the tower, maybe 60 feet up, was a flat panel antenna I didn't recognize. It wasn't a cellular panel. It wasn't a microwave dish. It was something else. Dark gray, roughly 2 feet square, with no visible cable run connecting it to anything at ground level. "When did that go up?" Dennis said. "You tell me. I've been looking at that tower every day for 19 years, and I've never seen it." But that wasn't true, and we all knew it, because you stop seeing things you look at every day. The tower was background. The antenna could have been there for months, years. Dennis sent Ramirez and Marcus to climb the tower. They came back 20 minutes later with close-up photos and a reading from Marcus's RF meter. The antenna was broadcasting on a frequency none of us could identify, not cellular, not public safety, not any licensed band Marcus knew. The signal was strong, very strong, and it was pulsing. "Pulsing how?" I asked. "Regular interval," Marcus said. "About 1 pulse per second, consistent amplitude. 1 pulse per second, 60 pulses per minute." I thought about the metronomic gait of the walkers. Step, 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 1 per second. "Can we kill it?" Dennis said. "I can cut the tower's feed line," Ramirez said. "But the antenna might have its own power source. It's not wired to anything we can see from outside." "Do it anyway." Ramirez took a pair of bolt cutters and went back out. 10 minutes later, the cell tower went dead. No more cellular service. No more legitimate antennas functioning. The gray panel antenna kept broadcasting. Marcus confirmed it from the ground. Same frequency, same pulse. Self-powered. And the signal lights kept doing exactly what they'd been doing. Dennis looked at me. I looked at Jerome. Jerome looked at the stream of walkers on Lexington Road, still flowing north, still in lockstep. And he said the thing I'd been thinking, but hadn't said. "It's not coming from the grid. It's coming from something else, and the grid is just obeying. Same as them." He pointed at the walkers. "Same as them." By nightfall on the first day, we had a clearer picture, and it was worse than what I'd imagined in the bucket lift. Becca Lee had a battery-powered AM/FM radio in her truck, and we gathered around it in the dispatch office at 7 p.m. with the doors locked and the blinds drawn. Not because the walkers had shown any interest in us, but because watching them pass under the yard's floodlights was doing something to Karen Opp's breathing that sounded like the early stages of a panic attack she couldn't afford. The radio was mostly dead air. Louisville's major stations were off, or looping automated emergency messages that contained no useful information. But at 8:40 a.m., a station out of Elizabethtown, SN, was still live. A man's voice, strained but controlled, identifying himself as a Hardin County emergency management volunteer. He said the following things, and I'm relaying them in order because the order matters. 1. The outbreak had been confirmed in 6 states simultaneously: Kentucky, Tennessee, Indiana, Ohio, West Virginia, and Virginia. No identified source. No identified vector. Onset was rapid minutes, not hours. Infected individuals ceased responsive behavior and began walking in a consistent direction that varied by region. 2. The military had established containment corridors, but the corridors weren't containment. They were movement channels. The infected were being funneled his word along specific highway routes. The signal grid was part of this. The National Guard had confirmed that the traffic signals were operating under a protocol no one at the state level had authorized. 3. There was a destination. He didn't know what it was. But the walking infected were converging on specific points, and the highway signals were directing living evacuees toward different specific points. And someone, some agency, some system, something was sorting the living from the dead and sending them to different places. 4. Do not follow the infected. If you are in a vehicle, do not follow the route the infected are walking. The vehicle routes and the walking routes were diverging. The signals would try to separate you. Let them. The broadcast cut out after that. We never picked it up again. Dennis turned off the radio. We sat in the dark for a minute. Alma was asleep in Nina's arms in the break room. I could hear her breathing through the wall, tiny, rapid, the only sound in the building that felt honest. 2 different routes, Dennis said. One for the living, one for the... Don't call them dead, Karen said. She was sitting on the floor with her arms around her knees. We don't know that they're dead. Karen. We don't. They're walking. Dead people don't walk. These ones do, Jerome said without cruelty. I watched a woman walk through the fence on Lexington Road an hour ago. Walked into a chain-link fence, didn't stop, didn't redirect. Pressed into the wire until the posts bent and she went through. Tore her arm open from elbow to wrist. Didn't bleed, not a drop. Karen put her head between her knees. The point, Dennis said, is that the system is separating us. The signals are creating 2 networks, one that moves traffic, one that moves the infected, and both networks are converging on destinations. So where's our destination? Ramirez asked. Nobody answered. The green light from the Lexington Road signal bled through the blinds and painted a stripe across the ceiling. It pulsed. Once per second. I went outside at midnight. Not because I wanted to, because I couldn't sleep, and because the signal cabinet on the nearest intersection, Lexington and Cochran Hill, was a 2-minute walk. And I needed to look inside one more time. The street was empty. The walkers had thinned to a trickle, one every few minutes now, still heading north, still in that rhythm. The green lights pulsed. I walked to the cabinet, opened it with my key, and shone my headlamp inside. Everything looked normal. Standard controller, standard conflict monitor, standard wiring. But the modem, the old cellular modem that let the TMC pull status data, was doing something I'd never seen. Its transmit light was flashing in a pattern that matched the signal's pulse. 1 per second, synchronized. And there was heat. The modem was warm, much warmer than operating temperature. I touched the back of the housing and pulled my hand away. Not burning, but close. The device was working at capacity, processing something, sending and receiving data at a rate far beyond what a status report required. I pulled the modem out of its housing. Nothing changed. The signal kept pulsing green northbound. The cabinet kept humming. The modem in my hand went dark, but the intersection didn't care. So it wasn't the modem. The modem was a symptom, not a cause. Something else was talking to the controller, through a channel I couldn't see, on a frequency I couldn't detect. And the modem was just listening along. I put the modem back. I closed the cabinet. I stood on the sidewalk at midnight in Louisville, Kentucky, under a green light that pulsed like a heartbeat. And I thought about Alma's mother walking north with that metronomic gait. And I thought about the Elizabethtown man saying the system was sorting the living from the dead. And I thought, if it's sorting, it knows. It can tell the difference. It's looking at every person in this city, and it's deciding alive. Go this way. Dead, go that way. How is it deciding? I walked back to the yard. Ramirez was on the roof with binoculars, keeping watch. He looked down at me. See anything? Nothing useful. Dennis wants to leave in the morning. Take the trucks, follow the vehicle corridor south. He thinks the signals will route us to wherever the living are supposed to go. He trusts the signals? Ramirez shrugged. He built the signals. If they're working better than they ever worked for him, maybe whatever's running them knows what it's doing. Or maybe whatever's running them needs us to go somewhere and can't make us walk there because we're still alive. Ramirez didn't answer that. He looked north, where the last of the evening's walkers was passing under a green light 3 blocks away. I'll take the first watch, he said. Get some sleep, Dale. I didn't sleep. I sat in the dispatch office and watched the terminal screen and tried to understand what I was seeing. And the green light pulsed through the window once per second. And Alma breathed through the wall. And the world ended at a frequency I could feel but not hear. We left the yard at dawn. 3 trucks, Dennis and Nina in his crew cab with Alma, Jerome and Karen in a utility truck, and me with Becca and Ramirez in my F350. Tom and Marcus had left during the night, taken one of the yard trucks without telling anyone, heading east toward Marcus's family in Frankfurt. Dennis found the note on the dispatch desk at 4 a.m. It said, "Sorry, can't wait. Going to find my kids." Nobody blamed them. Nobody had the standing to. Dennis's plan was to follow the vehicle corridor south toward Fort Knox. His logic was military. Fort Knox was a hardened installation with its own infrastructure, its own power, its own communication systems. If the federal government was running an evacuation protocol through the signal grid, Fort Knox was the kind of place that protocol would protect. The signals cooperated. The moment we pulled onto Lexington Road heading south, every light on the corridor cleared green. Not just the next one, all of them, as far as I could see. A chain of green lights stretching south toward the Gene Snyder Freeway. The cross streets went red. The path opened. We weren't alone. Other vehicles were on the road, also heading south, also catching the greens. We merged into a loose convoy without anyone organizing it. A minivan, a pickup with a German Shepherd standing in the bed, a Jefferson County school bus with no markings, a UPS truck, not the same one from Bardstown Road, I checked. We flowed south through Louisville like blood through an artery. The signals opening ahead of us and closing behind. And no one honked, no one swerved, no one panicked. The system was managing us so smoothly that panic felt unnecessary. The walkers were on a parallel path. Through the binoculars, Ramirez could see them on the adjacent streets, still heading north while we went south. 2 rivers flowing in opposite directions through the same city. The system had segregated us cleanly. They had their corridor. We had ours. Occasionally, a walker would drift toward our route, and the signal at the nearest cross street would flash, not cycle, flash, a rapid strobe of red that seemed to push the walker back, redirect them, the way a sheepdog redirects a stray from the flock. "It's hurting them," Becca said from the back seat. She'd been silent since we left, watching through the side window. And it's herding us. 2 separate herds. To 2 separate places, I said. Do you care where, Dale? Because I don't think I care where. I think I care about alive, and not being wherever they are. She wasn't wrong. That's the thing about a green light. It doesn't just tell you to go. It tells you that going is correct, that the direction you're moving is the sanctioned direction, that someone in authority has reviewed the situation and determined that you should proceed. 12 years of maintaining the systems that create that feeling. And I was as susceptible to it as anyone. We hit the Gene Snyder freeway, and the on-ramp signal was green. Southbound only. The northbound ramp was red, and there were concrete barriers across it, Jersey barriers, the kind the highway department uses for construction zones, placed deliberately to prevent entry. They hadn't been there yesterday. Someone had deployed them overnight. Someone with access to highway department equipment. On the freeway itself, the overhead lane use signals, the ones that normally display speed limits or construction warnings, were active. They showed arrows, green arrows, pointing south, 1 per overhead gantry, stretching into the distance like a runway's approach lights. Dennis's voice came over the walkie. Well, I guess we're going to Fort Knox. We drove. We didn't make it to Fort Knox. 20 miles south of Louisville, at the interchange where I-65 meets the Bluegrass Parkway, the arrows changed. They were still green, still pointing, but they no longer pointed south. They pointed west. The Bluegrass Parkway on-ramp was open. The I-65 southbound lanes were blocked, not with barriers this time, but with vehicles. Dozens of them, parked bumper to bumper across all 4 lanes, arranged with the kind of precision that suggested they'd been placed there by someone who'd had time to plan. The convoy, our 3 trucks, plus the 15 or so vehicles that had joined us, slowed to a stop. Dennis's voice came over the walkie. West. Dennis, Fort Knox is south. The road south is blocked. The arrows say west. We can get around the cars, take the shoulder, use the median. Dale. His voice dropped into the register he used when a field decision was final. We're not fighting the system. The system is the only thing keeping us separated from them. You want to go off script? You go off script. But Nina and the baby stay in the corridor. He was right. I hated that he was right, because what he was really saying was, we are not in control. We are packages being routed. And the routing has changed, and we are going to accept the change, because the alternative is to step outside the system that is keeping us alive. We turned west onto the Bluegrass Parkway. The parkway runs through the heart of Kentucky Bardstown, Springfield, Harrodsburg, Lexington. It's a beautiful road under normal circumstances, cutting through rolling farmland and bourbon country. Under these circumstances, it was a chute. 2 lanes in each direction, limited exits, and the exit ramps were all red. Every one. The system was not letting anyone off. Becca saw them first. Right side, tree line. Walkers. Not on the road, in the fields, moving parallel to the parkway about 100 yards to the north. A column of them, hundreds, maybe more, walking west with that same 1 step per second cadence. They were on their own corridor too. Not a road, just a bearing, a compass heading they were following through open terrain with a kind of relentlessness that terrain cannot discourage. They were going the same direction we were. I thought it separated us, Karen said over the walkie. She was watching them through Jerome's binoculars. It is separating us, I said. Parallel tracks, same destination, different arrivals. Why? Nobody answered. At Bardstown, the exit to the town, not the road in Louisville. The corridor changed again. The parkway arrows went dark. No more green, no more direction. The overhead signs displayed a single word, white text on black background, repeating on every gantry. Exit. Dennis pulled to the shoulder. I pulled behind him. The convoy stacked up, vehicles idling, waiting. "It wants us off here," Dennis said, "or it's lost control of the parkway and this is as far as the system extends." Only one way to find out. We took the exit. The ramp signal was green. Bardstown, Kentucky. Population 13,000, give or take. Historic downtown. Bourbon distilleries. Civil War tourism. A Walmart on the bypass. We rolled off the ramp and onto Route 62, and the signal at the bottom was green, pointing us into town. The town was not empty. There were living people standing along Route 62, watching us arrive. Not a crowd. Maybe 40, 50, gathered near the Bardstown City Hall, some armed, some carrying supplies, all of them with the hollow, electric look of people who have been awake too long and have seen things they cannot process. A man in a Bardstown Police Department uniform stepped into the road and held up his hand. Dennis stopped. I stopped. The convoy stopped. The officer walked to Dennis's window. I couldn't hear what they said, but I watched Dennis's face through the windshield, and I saw it change the way a face changes when someone tells you something that reorganizes everything you thought you understood. He got out of the truck and walked back to my window. "The signals brought them here too," he said. "Everyone in that group, routed from different directions, different parts of the state. The signals brought them all to Bardstown." "How many?" "They've been arriving all day. That group at City Hall is just the welcoming committee. There are 200 people in the high school gymnasium. More coming." "Why Bardstown?" Dennis looked at the green signal behind us. It had gone red. The corridor was closed. We were here. "The officer says the signals went dark an hour ago, everywhere except inside town limits. Every light in Bardstown still works. Every light outside Bardstown is dead. It's..." He rubbed his face. "It's like a fence, Dale, made of red lights." The gymnasium of Bardstown High School smelled like sweat and fear and the industrial lemon cleaner they use on basketball courts. 231 people when I counted, which I did 3 times because counting gave me something to do with my mind besides listen to the stories. Everyone had the same story. Different starting points, different routes, same narrative shape. The lights changed. The lights guided them. The lights brought them here. A family from Elizabethtown routed up 31E. A group of hospital workers from Lexington herded down the Bluegrass Parkway. A man named Curtis, who'd been driving a propane truck outside Danville, when every signal on his route turned green pointing east, drawing him toward Bardstown like iron filings toward a magnet. No one had been attacked. No one had been injured by the walkers. The system had kept them separated with a precision that bordered on surgical green corridors for the living, parallel corridors for the dead, never intersecting, never converging, until everyone alive was inside Bardstown and everyone dead was walking past it. That was the detail that unraveled me. The walkers were passing Bardstown. I climbed to the roof of City Hall with Ramirez's binoculars and looked north, and the column was still there. The dead moving west through the fields north of town. Hundreds of them, thousands maybe, a river of wrong-moving bodies flowing past Bardstown, the way a river flows past a rock. They did not enter. The red signals of the town's perimeter held them out the same way the red signals had held them away from our vehicle corridor. They approached the boundary and they turned, deflected, redirected, continuing west, always west. Bardstown was not their destination. Bardstown was ours. "So what's west?" Curtis asked. We were in the gym, sitting on the bleachers, the kind of impromptu council that forms when there's no authority left and someone needs to say something. Curtis was big 6'4", heavy, with a propane company logo on his jacket and hands that looked like they could crack walnuts. He'd become a voice in the group because he was loud and certain. And certainty is currency in a crisis. "Fort Campbell is west," Dennis said. "Eventually, way west." "What about closer? What's where they're all going?" I'd been thinking about this, staring at the road map I'd found in the City Hall's emergency management office, tracing the bearing the walkers were following, extending it west across the state. "If they keep on this heading," I said, "they hit Mammoth Cave." Silence. Not because the name meant anything tactical. Because the name meant something geographic. Mammoth Cave is the longest known cave system in the world. Over 400 miles of mapped passages. And nobody knows how much remains unmapped. It's a hole in the earth. The biggest hole in the earth. "They're going underground," Karen said. "We don't know that." 400 miles of cave, Dale. If something was moving the dead somewhere, and it wanted them out of the way, we don't know that's what's happening. But that's where the line points. You said it yourself. I had said it. I regretted saying it, because the idea was too large and too strange, and it implied things about the purpose of the system that I didn't want to examine. If the signal network was sorting living from dead, routing the living to sheltered towns and the dead to an underground cave system, then the system wasn't just managing traffic. It was managing an outcome. It had a plan, and plans imply a planner. "Who built this?" Curtis said. He asked it directly, looking at Dennis, looking at me, the two signal guys, the two people in the room who should have known. "I don't know," Dennis said. "You worked on these systems." "I maintained the signals. I didn't build the network architecture. I didn't install the communication layer. That was federal FHWA contracts, done years before I started." Federal. Curtis let the word sit. "So the government built a system to sort people during an apocalypse and didn't tell anyone." "I don't think it's that simple." "It's exactly that simple. They knew this was coming. They built the funnel. And now we're in the pen." I watched the room react. Curtis's certainty was doing what certainty does. It was providing a framework. And people were climbing into it because frameworks feel safer than mystery. The government did this. The government knew. The government is in control. The alternative, that no one was in control, that the system was operating autonomously, that whatever intelligence was running the signals was not human and not answerable to any human institution, was not something 231 exhausted people in a high school gymnasium were ready to consider. I wasn't ready to consider it either. I went outside. Nina found me on the City Hall steps at 2 a.m. She'd put Alma down in the nursery the Bardstown people had set up in the home economics classrooms, cribs improvised from dresser drawers, formula scavenged from the Walmart. A rotation of volunteers who rocked and fed and changed with the focused tenderness of people who needed something small and alive to care for. "She's sleeping," Nina said. "First time she's slept more than 40 minutes. "Good." Nina sat beside me. She was 53 but looked 63. The last 24 hours had extracted time from her face the way a drought extracts water from soil. "I keep thinking about her mother," Nina said. "Walking away from that stroller? What was she before the whatever it is? A nurse, maybe. She was wearing scrubs. A nurse who pushed her baby to the sidewalk on Bardstown Road. And then something happened, and she walked away and didn't look back." Nina folded her hands. Do you think she's still in there, the mother? I don't know. Because if she's walking toward Mammoth Cave right now, and some part of her knows she left her baby? Nina. I know. I'm sorry. We sat. The green light at the nearest intersection pulsed through the dark. Inside Bardstown, the signals still worked. Green in all directions, cycling normally, as if the town were a pocket of sanity in a state that had lost its mind. I found it more unsettling than the corridor signals, because normal felt like camouflage. Normal felt like the system pretending it wasn't watching. Dennis wants to stay, Nina said. He thinks this is the destination, that the system brought us here for a reason, and we should trust it. And you? I think Alma needs a roof and formula and people who can help me take care of her. I think the gym has a roof, and the Walmart has formula. And there are people here who lost their own children today and would hold this baby like she was theirs. I think staying is the practical choice. That's not what I asked. Nina looked at me. In the green light, her eyes were the color of the signal artifact of the LED wavelength, turning everything it touched into a version of itself. I don't trust it, she said. But I don't have a better option, and neither do you. She was right. She was right the way Dennis was right. The way the green lights were right. Not because the logic was airtight, but because every alternative had already been sealed off. The next 3 days were the closest thing to normal we would get. Bardstown organized itself with a speed that I found both impressive and frightening. The Bardstown PD officer, his name was Garrett Pulliam. 6 years on the force, the only officer who hadn't walked or driven away, established a perimeter using the signal boundary. The red lights at the town limits were the walls. No walkers entered. He put volunteers at each road into town with radios and binoculars, watching the perimeter lights the way prison guards watch fences. The Walmart was inventoried. The grocery stores, the pharmacies, the hardware store. Curtis took charge of supply management with the energy of a man who needed control the way I needed understanding. He cataloged everything, assigned rations, set up distribution in the gym. He was good at it. He was also building a power base, and Dennis saw it, and I saw it, and we let it happen because someone had to do it, and Dennis was too tired and I was too distracted. I was distracted because I was spending every available hour in the signal cabinets. Bardstown had 14 signalized intersections. I opened every cabinet. I inspected every controller, every conflict monitor, every modem, every inch of wiring. And I found it the same thing in every one. A component that shouldn't have been there. Not a gray box like the one the Elizabethtown man described. Something subtler. A modification to the controller board itself, 3 additional components soldered to the main PCB. So small and so cleanly installed that they looked factory. A microprocessor the size of a fingernail. A surface mount antenna no bigger than a grain of rice. And a component I couldn't identify, a black chip with no markings, connected to the processor and the antenna with traces so fine they were nearly invisible. I showed Jerome. He looked at it under a magnifying glass and said nothing for a long time. "That's been there a while," he said. "The solder is aged. The flux residue matches the rest of the board. Whoever installed this did it during manufacturing." During manufacturing, at the factory. At the factory, which means every controller that came off that production line has this. We looked at each other. The implications were staggering, and I didn't want to stagger. So I focused on the technical, the concrete, the thing I could measure, the signal from the rice grain antenna. I borrowed Marcus's RF meter. He'd left it at the yard, and I'd packed it, and I measured the transmission. Same frequency as the cell tower antenna in Louisville. Same pulse rate, 1 per second. But the signal wasn't just transmitting, it was networked. Each cabinet was talking to every other cabinet, forming a mesh network that covered the town. And the mesh was talking to something outside the town, through whatever long-range transmission system the corridor cabinets used. The entire signal grid, not just Bardstown, not just Kentucky, possibly the entire national traffic signal network, was a distributed computing system that had been hidden in plain sight since the day the controllers were manufactured. I sat on the curb outside the Bardstown courthouse, and I felt the same thing I'd felt on the bucket lift, watching the woman in scrubs stand up with her marionette smoothness, the ground tilting, the sense that the surface I'd been standing on was not the floor but a lid, and something underneath had just pushed it open. On the fourth day, the lights at the perimeter flickered. Garrett Pulliam was the one who reported it. He called Dennis on the radio at 6:14 a.m. and said the red signals on the north side of town Route 62 at the bypass had gone from steady red to flashing red for approximately 12 seconds before returning to steady. During those 12 seconds, 3 walkers had entered the roadway before being deflected back when the steady red resumed. 12 seconds, 3 walkers, the margin between safety and catastrophe measured in signal phases. I went to the north perimeter with Jerome. The signals looked normal, steady red on all approaches except the one leading into town. The walkers were still passing in the fields beyond, but their column had thinned. Fewer of them now. The main body had moved further west. "They're almost past," Jerome said. "Column's been thinning since yesterday. Whatever's pulling them toward the cave, most of them have already gone." "So why did the signal flicker?" Jerome didn't answer. He was looking at something in the distance, a figure standing at the tree line, maybe 200 yards north. Not walking, standing, facing us. I raised the binoculars. A man, middle-aged, wearing khaki pants and a blue Oxford shirt, standing at the tree line with his arms at his sides. Not moving, not walking west with the others. Facing south, facing Bardstown. "He's not following the column," I said. "No." "He's looking at us." "Yes." We watched him for 20 minutes. He didn't move. He stood at the tree line and faced the town, and I could not see his expression at that distance, but I could feel his attention, if attention is the right word, for whatever process was happening behind those still eyes. Then the perimeter signal flickered again. 3 seconds this time, flashing red. The universal signal for a 4-way stop. The degraded mode that says the system has failed and human judgment must take over. The walker at the tree line took a step forward. 1 step. Then the steady red came back and he stopped. "He's testing it," Jerome said. "He's a dead man. Dead men don't test things." Then whatever's driving him is testing it, sending a probe to see if the fence holds. I thought about the mesh network in the cabinets. I thought about the rice grain antenna and the unmarked black chip. I thought about 2 systems, one routing the living, one routing the dead, both running on the same hardware, both embedded in the same infrastructure, both hidden inside the same controller boards since the day of manufacture. 2 programs sharing 1 machine. And now, maybe, one of them was trying to override the other. I ran back to City Hall and found Dennis in the emergency management office. "We have a problem." I explained the flicker. I explained the walker who wasn't walking. I explained what I thought it meant. That the signal network was running 2 competing protocols, one that protected the living and one that moved the dead. And the dead protocol was beginning to assert priority over the living protocol. Dennis listened. He was a man who made decisions based on engineering principles, and the principle here was clear. Redundant systems fail when they compete for resources. "How long?" he said. "I don't know. The flickers are getting longer. If the pattern holds..." "How long, Dale?" "Days, maybe less." He closed his eyes. "Curtis has been pushing to stay. He's got 200 people convinced Bardstown is the safe zone. He's not going to accept that the safe zone has an expiration date. The safe zone is a traffic signal running a protocol that something is actively trying to overwrite. When the overwrite succeeds, the red lights go green, and there's nothing between those things and the town. Then we need to go somewhere the walkers have already left." I looked at the map. The column had been flowing west for days. Everything east of us had been swept clean. The walkers had passed through like a tide, and what was left behind was empty. The corridor, the green lights, the herding system, it had already moved the dead out of the eastern part of the state. "East," I said. "Back toward Louisville. The walkers are west of us now. If we go east, we're behind them." Through dead signals, no corridor, no green lights. "We're traffic engineers, Dennis. We know the roads. We don't need the lights." He looked at the map. He looked at the window, with a green light pulsed at the nearest intersection, steady as ever, reliable as ever, a heartbeat that might stop at any moment. "Get Jerome and Ramirez," he said. "Start planning a route." Curtis said no. He said it in the gymnasium, in front of everyone, standing on the free throw line like a man delivering a verdict. "We're staying. The signals brought us here. They're protecting us. We leave, we lose the protection." "The protection is failing," I said. I explained the flickers. I explained the competing protocols. I used the RF meter readings, the timing data, the pattern analysis. I laid it out the way I'd lay out a signal timing plan, clear, sequential, evidence-based. Curtis listened. Then he said, "You're a traffic light repairman telling 200 people to abandon the only safe place in Kentucky based on a theory about firmware." He wasn't wrong about what I was. He was wrong about what the data showed. But he wasn't wrong about who was interpreting it. Authority is not expertise in a crisis. Authority is mass. Curtis had mass. I had a voltage meter. The vote, if you could call it a vote. It was more of a gravitational sorting split roughly down the middle. 112 people chose to stay with Curtis. 119 chose to leave with Dennis. The split was ugly, but bloodless, which was the best we could have hoped for. And the groups separated with the practiced efficiency of people who had already been sorted once by a system larger than themselves. We left Bardstown at dawn on day 5. 41 vehicles, 119 people, including Alma, who was riding with Nina in Dennis's truck, wrapped in a donated blanket, utterly unaware that her life was being determined by traffic signals and the men who argued about them. I drove the lead truck because I knew the intersections. Every one. I'd maintained them, repaired them, replaced their components. I knew which ones had battery backup and which ones would go dark without grid power. I knew the sight distances, the lane configurations, the turning radii. This was the one advantage of being a traffic light repairman. At the end of the world, the infrastructure was my vocabulary, and I could read it the way a sailor reads the coast. The signals outside Bardstown were dark, dead. No green, no red, no flash. Just black signal heads hanging over empty intersections. And the silence was worse than the herding, because the silence meant the system had stopped talking and we were on our own. We drove east on Route 62 toward the Bluegrass Parkway. The road was empty, the walkers had passed through days ago. leaving behind scattered objects that marked their passage like flotsam after a flood. Shoes, a wheelchair tipped on its side, a child's backpack. The items people had been carrying when the change took them dropped where they stood and left behind as the body continued without the person. I didn't stop. I wanted to stop the backpack especially, made me think of Lily, who was 10 and had a pink backpack with a cat on it. But Dennis was right behind me on the walkie saying, "Keep moving, Dale. Don't stop," in the voice he used when he was managing not just the convoy, but his own desire to stop and grieve for a world that was dropping its possessions and walking into the dark. We reached the Bluegrass Parkway interchange at noon. The barriers that had blocked I-65 southbound 5 days ago were still there, but they didn't matter. We weren't going south. We were going east on the parkway, back the way we'd come, toward Lexington. The parkway was silent. No overhead arrows, no lane use signals. Just 4 lanes of empty highway stretching east under a sky that was too blue, too clear, too indifferent to what had happened beneath it. Becca drove while I navigated. Jerome was in the truck behind us. Karen was 3 vehicles back, in a minivan with a family from Elizabethtown, who'd adopted her the way people adopt strays during disasters, not formally, not with discussion, but by making space and sharing food and not asking questions. We were 40 miles east of Bardstown when Ramirez, who was in the rear vehicle, came on the walkie. "Contact, behind us, 2 miles. I picked up the binoculars and looked through the rear window. At first I saw nothing, just the empty parkway curving away. Then the curve straightened, and I saw them. Walkers, on the highway, coming from the west. Not the main column that was still moving toward Mammoth Cave, miles to the south. These were stragglers, or maybe outriders, or maybe something else entirely, a smaller group, 50 or 60, walking east on the Bluegrass Parkway with that same 1 per second cadence. And they were not wandering. They were following the road, following us. "Speed up," Dennis said on the walkie. "Don't panic, just increase speed." We went from 50 to 70. The walkers didn't speed up. They maintained their pace, steady, metronomic, unhurried. But they were on the same road, going the same direction. And even at walking speed, they were a presence behind us, a pressure, a reminder that the system had let us go, but maybe hadn't let us go entirely. "Are they following us?" Becca asked. "They're going east. We're going east. Could be coincidence." "You don't believe that?" No, I didn't. We reached Lexington at dusk. The city was empty, not destroyed, not burning, just empty. Cars parked on streets, lights off in windows, doors open on houses where people had walked out and not come back. A city-sized Mary Celeste, everything in place, everyone gone. The signals were dark, every intersection dead. No power to the grid or no signal from whatever system had been driving them. We navigated by memory and paper maps and the dying light of a sun that didn't know what had happened to the species that tracked its position. Dennis found us building a Kentucky Utilities Operations Center on the east side of the city, chosen because it had a backup generator, a fenced perimeter, and a communications tower on the roof. We pulled the convoy inside the fence and shut the gate, and people started the mechanical process of making a space survivable. Clearing rooms, inventorying supplies, establishing a water source from the building's reserve tanks. I went to the communications tower. It was a standard lattice tower, maybe 100 feet, with multiple antenna arrays and a small equipment shelter at the base. The shelter was locked. Jerome and I pried it open with a tire iron. Inside, a rack of communications equipment, most of it standard utility company gear for SCADA systems and grid management. But on the bottom shelf, separate from the utility equipment, connected to its own antenna feed and its own battery backup, was a device I recognized. Gray plastic, no markings, size of a deck of cards, stubby antenna. Identical to the device the Elizabethtown broadcast had described in the traffic cabinets. Its power light was on. It was still running. Whatever system was driving the traffic signals, this device was part of it, a node in the network. Still active, still transmitting, still connected to the architecture, even though the signals themselves had gone dark. I looked at Jerome. Can you trace the signal? With what? The RF meter, Marcus's equipment. The antenna on this shelter has a directional feed. If we can determine where this device is talking to, we can find the source. Jerome thought about it the way Jerome thought about everything, slowly, carefully, with the methodical precision of a man who'd spent 40 years making sure wires went to the right terminals. I can try, he said. He tried for 3 hours. When he came down from the tower, his face was different. Not scared, awed. It's not talking to a source, he said. It's talking to other nodes. Thousands of them. The signal is mesh networked across the entire region. But the processing, Dale, the processing is distributed. There's no central server. The intelligence is in the network itself. Every node is running a piece of it. The traffic signals, the utility towers, cell towers, broadcast antennas, anything with one of these gray boxes. They're all thinking together. Thinking. I don't have a better word. The signal patterns are too complex for relay logic, too adaptive. This isn't a program executing instructions, it's... He stopped himself. Jerome was not a man given to speculation. It's emergent behavior, like a flock of birds. No single bird decides where the flock goes. The flock decides, and this network is a flock. A flock that's been embedded in our infrastructure since the controllers were manufactured. Yes, and it activated when the outbreak started. Or it caused the outbreak. Or the outbreak caused it. Or they're both symptoms of something else. I don't know, Dale. I know wiring and signal timing and load calculations. I don't know this. Neither did I. But I knew what the network had done. It had sorted the living from the dead, routed the living to sheltered towns, routed the dead toward an underground cave system, and managed the entire process through a distributed intelligence running on hardware that had been hidden inside every traffic controller in the country. And now the signals were dark, and the network was still running. And the walkers behind us were coming east. And the fence around the utility center was chain link, not red lights. And chain link can be walked through by anything that doesn't feel pain. We stayed in Lexington for 2 days. Not because it was safe, it wasn't. Because people needed to sleep in rooms with doors that locked. And Alma needed formula we found in an abandoned Kroger. And Dennis needed to make a plan that didn't involve following lights that had gone dark. On the second night, I climbed to the roof of the utility center and looked west with the binoculars. The stragglers from the parkway had not arrived. Maybe they'd turned. Maybe they'd found another path. Maybe they were still coming, and I couldn't see them in the dark. I looked east toward where we'd go in the morning. Dennis's new plan was Winchester, then the Mountain Parkway, then Prestonsburg, then the Virginia border. The logic was simple. The further east we went, the more mountainous the terrain, and mountains channeled movement through valleys and gaps. If the walkers were heading west toward Mammoth Cave, the eastern mountains would be behind them. Cleared, empty. It was a good plan. It was also a plan built on assumptions about a system none of us understood, and I sat on that roof and thought about Curtis in Bardstown with his 112 people. And I wondered if the perimeter signals had held, or if the competing protocol had won, and the red lights had turned green, and the dead had walked into town with that terrible 1 step per second patience. I thought about calling. I had a radio. Curtis had a radio. But I didn't call. And the reason I didn't call is the thing I'm most ashamed of. I didn't want to know. If the signals had failed and Curtis's group was dead, knowing wouldn't change it. And if they'd held, knowing would make me question our decision to leave. Either way, the knowledge would cost more than the ignorance. And I was rationing everything now, including what I allowed myself to feel. That's what this does to you. Not the dead, not the walking, not the signals or the system or the gray boxes or the mesh network. What it does to you is teach you to ration your own humanity, to calculate the emotional cost of every thought, to close doors inside yourself the way the system closes intersections, red light, no entry. That part of you is shut down until further notice. I came down from the roof. Nina was in the hallway with Alma on her shoulder. The baby was awake, staring at nothing with those wide, dark eyes. And Nina was humming something not a lullaby. A Patsy Cline song. Crazy. She was humming Crazy to a baby at 2 a.m. in an abandoned utility building in Lexington, Kentucky, while the world outside sorted itself into living and dead. And it was the most human sound I'd heard in a week. "You should sleep," she said. "Can't." "Then hold her for a while. She likes being held by you. She's 8 months old. She doesn't have preferences about. She likes being held by you, Dale. Take the baby." I took the baby. Alma settled against my chest with a sigh that had no right being that peaceful. And I stood in the hallway and held her, and Nina went to sleep, and the green light from the nearest signal dark, dead. The LED module's cold did not pulse through the window. And the absence of it was louder than the pulse had ever been. We drove east for 3 days. The mountain parkway was clear. The towns along the route, Winchester, Stanton, Campton, Salyersville, were empty but intact. Walkers had passed through and moved on. We found supplies in every town: food, fuel, medicine, ammunition. The system had moved the population so efficiently that there'd been no looting, no destruction, no collapse, just absence. Everyone had gone somewhere. The living corralled into towns like Bardstown, the dead walking toward whatever waited in the caves. And what remained was a landscape that looked like the set of a play after the actors had gone home. In Prestonsburg, at the junction of Route 23 and the Parkway, we found a working signal. Green, pointing east, pulsing at 1 per second. It was the first active signal we'd seen since Bardstown, and the convoy stopped. And I got out and stood under it and felt the pulse in my sternum the way I'd felt it the first night in Louisville. And I knew the network was still alive, still running, still routing. I opened the cabinet. Standard controller, standard components, gray box on the modem port. The gray box was warm. The antenna was vibrating. "It wants us to keep going east," Becca said, "or it's a trap, or it's the other protocol, or it's automated and doesn't know we're here." "It knows we're here, Dale. It always knew we were here." She was right. The system had tracked us from the first minute, routing our vehicles with a precision that required real-time awareness of every moving object in the network. Of course, it knew we were here. The question was whether what it wanted for us was the same as what we wanted for ourselves. Dennis came up behind me. He looked at the green light. He looked at me. "What do your instincts say?" "My instincts are calibrated for troubleshooting electrical systems, Dennis. They don't cover this." "Then what does 12 years of maintaining signals say?" I thought about it. I thought about every controller I'd ever programmed, every timing plan I'd ever optimized, every intersection I'd ever balanced between competing demands, the through traffic versus the turning traffic, the pedestrians versus the vehicles, the fire trucks versus everyone else. Traffic engineering is the art of moving things that don't agree about where they're going. It is the science of competing priorities. 12 years says the system was designed to move people safely. That's what traffic signals do. Even this version, the hidden version, the embedded version, whatever it is, it was designed by someone who understood the principles. The corridor routing, the conflict avoidance, the progression timing. These are traffic engineering concepts, executed at a scale I've never seen, but the fundamentals are the same. So follow the green. Follow the green, but keep the option to run a red. He almost smiled. Dennis Corey had not smiled since the bucket lift, and this was not a smile, but it was adjacent to one, and I took it. We followed the green. The green lights led us to Pikeville. Pikeville, Kentucky. Population 7,000, nestled in a river valley between mountain ridges. The kind of town that geography makes defensible without anyone having to build a wall. The ridges channeled access to 3 roads. 3 roads meant 3 intersections to control. 3 intersections meant 3 signals. All 3 were green, facing east, welcoming us in. There were people inside. Not a gymnasium full, a town full. Pikeville had never been evacuated. The walkers had flowed around it the way they'd flowed around Bardstown, deflected by the perimeter signals. But here, the geography reinforced the electronic fence. The ridges were barriers the dead couldn't easily climb. And the 3 controlled roads were choke points a handful of signals could manage. The population had swelled with arrivals from the signal corridors. 3,000 people, maybe more, organized not by a Curtis or a Dennis, but by the town's existing infrastructure, the mayor, the police chief, the volunteer fire department, the churches. They had power from the hydroelectric dam on the Levisa Fork. They had food from the Walmart distribution center on the bypass. They had communication from a ham radio network connecting them to similar enclaves across eastern Kentucky and southwest Virginia. Pikeville was what Bardstown wanted to be. Bardstown was a rest stop. Pikeville was a destination. We pulled through the green light at the Route 23 junction, and a woman in a Pikeville PD jacket directed us to a staging area in the parking lot of the community college. She was organized, efficient, and she had a clipboard. And the clipboard did more for my morale than anything had since the bucket lift. People with clipboards were planning. People who were planning believed in a future. A future was the thing I'd stopped letting myself imagine. Somewhere on the Bluegrass Parkway, while walkers moved in my rearview mirror. Dennis handled the logistics of integrating our group. Jerome and I handled the signals. The Pikeville signal system was small 11 intersections, all running the same modified controllers. But here, something was different. The ham radio operators had been in contact with the National Guard unit at Camp Dawson in West Virginia, and the Guard had confirmed what I'd suspected. The embedded system in the traffic controllers was a federal program, classified, installed during a routine nationwide controller replacement cycle funded through the FHWA 6 years ago. It was called Meridian. The name meant nothing, a bureaucratic label, randomly generated, deliberately opaque. Meridian was designed as a continuity of population system. In the event of a catastrophic national emergency, it would activate and use the traffic signal network to route civilians to pre-designated safe zones while managing the movement of threats away from population centers. It was autonomous. It was distributed. It had no central command, no kill switch, No human oversight once activated. The Camp Dawson Guard unit had one more piece of information. Meridian had a timer. The sorting protocol, the one that separated living from dead, was designed to run for 30 days. After 30 days, the system assumed the sorting was complete and would shut down. All signals would return to normal operation. The electronic fences would drop. The green corridors would close. We had 18 days left. So in 18 days, we're on our own, Dennis said. In 18 days, the signals stop protecting us. The geography still works. The ridges, the choke points, the river. Pikeville is defensible without the signals. But only if the walkers stay west. If the walkers stay west. He looked at me. I looked at the mountain ridge to the north, dark against the evening sky, solid and ancient and indifferent to the question of whether a distributed artificial intelligence embedded in traffic infrastructure would successfully herd the dead into an underground cave system before its 30-day timer expired. We build the defenses, Dennis said. We assume the signals go dark. We make Pikeville work without Meridian. Yes. And in the meantime, I'm going to learn everything I can about the system. Because when it shuts down, someone needs to understand what it was and what it did, and whether it can be restarted if we need it again. Dennis nodded. He went to the staging area to help Nina settle Alma into a real crib, in a real room, in a real building with a real roof. And I went to the signal cabinet at Route 23 and Main Street, and I opened it, and I looked at the controller board with its hidden components and its rice grain antenna and its unmarked black chip. And I started taking notes. I'm still taking notes. It's day 26. 4 days past Meridian's shutdown. The signals went dark at midnight on day 22, all at once. Every intersection in Pikeville going black like a held breath, finally released. Nothing happened. The walkers didn't come. The ridges held. The 3 roads into town stayed empty, and the volunteers at the checkpoints reported nothing but wind and bird song and the slow, strange silence of a world that had stopped being managed. I don't know what happened at Mammoth Cave. The ham radio network carries rumors that the entrances collapsed, that the military sealed them, that the dead went in and didn't come out. I don't know what happened in Bardstown. Curtis never answered his radio. I'll carry that silence for the rest of whatever this is. Alma is learning to crawl. She does it in the community college hallway, on a carpet someone laid down, with Nina 2 feet behind her and me sitting at the end of the hall holding a plastic cup she likes to grab. She is 10 months old, and she has never known a world where traffic lights worked the way they were supposed to. And I wonder sometimes if that means she'll grow up trusting systems less than I did, or more. I was a man who fixed traffic lights. Red means stop. Green means go. I understood the binary. I maintained the binary. And then the binary turned out to be a language I'd never learned, spoken by something I can't identify. And it saved my life with a grammar I'm still trying to parse. The lights are dark now. I keep the cabinet at Route 23 and Main Street unlocked. I check the controller board every morning. The hidden components are still there. The rice grain antenna, the unmarked chip. Cold, silent, waiting. I tell myself it's over. I tell Alma it's over when I hold her at night and Nina hums Patsy Cline in the next room and the dark intersection outside the window holds its breath. But I've spent 12 years reading signals, and I know the difference between off and standby. The light isn't off, it's just not green yet.